everyone. This morning, a friend of mine told me a funny story, what actually happened for her. You know the story about the snake and the rope, right? It's like a man walking down the street and sees something coiled up and thinks it's a snake and is really scared only to find out it's a rope. And it talks about our perspective. And my friend was telling me this morning that she was somewhere in a space that she was taking care of, and she saw a little twig on the floor, and she went like, oh, let me pick up the twig, and it ended up being a worm. And so we were talking about, it's like, you know, these notions we have about things that we are so sure it's a certain thing, but it's not. And I think that's a really good perspective to keep in the world. You know, I think with everything that's happening and the stress we might be feeling, it's like it's very easy to go to our standard beliefs about things. But when we're contracted, then we only have crumbs. We only taste crumbs. And when you know, most of what we eat, so to speak, doesn't taste very well. And then the crumbs of love, we have been already talking so much about love this morning. The crumbs of love might just be, oh, thank God, here I have a crumb of love. But I think what the world needs right now is us not being okay with that anymore. And really start to tap into that inner power that we have. Again, the love we have been talking about, it's like that unconditional love that is divine consciousness that is expressing. It's truly within us. And we have to have that shift of consciousness so that we don't think it's a twig, but we pick up a worm. You know, that we start to recognize what is true, and that is what we're exploring this morning. At the coast of the Aegean Sea, I've been practicing this word, at the coast of the Aegean Sea in Turkey, there is a cave that contains frescoes from the 5th century. On the main fresco, there's a man who represents the Apostle Paul from the New Testament. The Apostle Paul used to be a Pharisee named Saul. And Saul did not like the followers of Jesus, and he actually actively persecuted them. He went so far as to get the high priest to write letters to the synagogues in Damascus, asking the leaders of the synagogue to work with him to arrest the followers of Jesus. So people were really scared of him. Any resemblance of what is happening, right? It's like there was great fear. So Paul was traveling with a group of people to Damascus to start arresting more people. And on his way, he was, all of a sudden, his space was flooded with an outer worldly light. And he heard the voice of Jesus who said, "Why are you persecuting my people?" And it's like in that moment when the light diminished, he was blind. He could not see. And his companions on his journey had to help him and guide him to Damascus. When he got to Damascus, the time he spent while being blind, he spent it in prayer and contemplation. He started listening to the truth. And when he arrived in Damascus, a man came who was a follower of Jesus, who actually healed him by a laying of hands in the name of Jesus. How the universe sometimes has an interesting sense of humor, right? Through this whole experience, Saul was converted and was baptized and actually became a very prominent figure in the Christian church. At the time, it was not called the Christian church yet, but he became a very prominent figure in the Christian church. It was like all the energy he had spent to persecute followers now was moved into spreading the word of Jesus. What Paul experienced was what we call a metanoia. It's a beautiful word. It's like it means a shift in consciousness, a turning around of perception, seeing life from a truer center. In the fresco, you also see a red brick building with a window, and in the window there's a young woman who's sitting there listening intently to what Paul has to say. That woman is Thecla. And Thecla, again, it's like this place like 30 CE, and at that time women weren't their own people. Well, they were their own people, they were their own person, but that's not how society saw it. A daughter was owned by her father. And then once she married, she was owned by her husband. So Thecla was owned by her father and was already engaged and would soon marry. So even her future husband already saw her as his property. Women could do spiritual practices, but with very strict guidelines. They definitely couldn't be spiritual masters. When Thecla was listening to the word of Paul, she had her own metanoia. Paul was preaching about love. Paul was preaching about that inner love that exists in all of us and that is all around us and that doesn't discriminate. That love that is equal regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of status in society. Now that was unheard of at that time. But for Thecla, it struck a chord. And she was listening very intently and started to see her life in a different way. And she decided to follow Paul. Now you can imagine what a ruckus that created. But both Paul and Thecla had such an embodied experience of that love that they did not waver. I don't say that they didn't have their moments. I imagine they did, because they were persecuted. People wanted to kill them. They were thrown in jail. They had a lot of hardship. But just imagine that experience of that unconditional love is so settled in your body, in your experience, that you cannot deny it. So no matter what happens, that's what you stand for. Can you imagine that happening in the world right now, if we were all in that place? Eventually the world has to show up as a loving world. Megan Watterson, a Harvard-trained theologian, defines love as follows in her book, The Girl Who Baptized Herself. The book is about Thecla. She says, love is not an emotion. It's not a sentiment, a fleeting feeling. Love is not transactional. It's not fair or rational. Love is an actual presence. It's a presence that's within us. And it's more vast than I could ever name or that my own individual life can ever grasp. Love is an actual presence that calls us to be present to it, to be its witness if we can allow that small egoic self to quiet down enough to just listen. We must be willing to listen. Love is an actual presence that calls us to be present to it. A teacher of mine talked about the power of love. She said, love is like rose petals dulling the blade of a sword. What the world needs right now are people who stand strong in this love that is already present within us. It takes time and courage to embrace that unconditional love that is within us. You know, sometimes we get a moment and we see it, but we have to develop it. Can you think of a moment that was a metanoia for you, that shifted your life? Where it happens for me is that one day, well, some years ago, I was offering selfless service at a welcome desk in a spiritual center. And you know, I'm human, so I knew the people there pretty well, and I had my ideas of what was right and what didn't work, and who showed up right, and who I would like to act differently, and etc., etc. And one day, I was at the desk, and this thing happened for me. All of a sudden, it was like I took a few steps back, and I just saw this scene in front of me, you know, unfolding. And I saw all the people I knew, but it was different. It's like every person was like a whole person, you know, complete and kind. And then like around them, like maybe a distance like this, there were their idiosyncrasies. And every person had their own unique idiosyncrasies. But it didn't really matter what they were. And it was like the idiosyncrasies were interacting with each other. That became the drama of life. But the people were fine. They were whole and complete. I don't even know quite which word to use. I've been thinking about this, but they were just, you know, they were just fine. And it really shifted my perspective. But what was so beautiful about it is that maybe intellectually I'd gotten that before, but it was such an experience that really sunk in for me. And it has been years, but still when I talk about it, it's right there. I still can see it. And it has really affected me in my life, because no matter what the circumstances are, I often have to think back at that experience and remind myself, we're all fine. You know, but here we're walking around with our idiosyncrasies. We're acting out for one reason or another. So when I can come from that, I can come from love. And the experience wasn't like with flashy lights or, you know, it was actually gray toned. It was very calm. It was just like, oh, and I started laughing. It was like so funny. You know, and I think it was so funny how caught up I could get in the idiosyncrasies that were just doing their thing. You know? It is so important to pay attention to the experiences we have like that. Because in the story of Thecla and Paul, there's actually a scripture called the Acts of Paul and Thecla. In that story, you know, that their metanoia is so dramatic. But I believe that we all have our moments, and it might not be so dramatic, and it might not be 3 days. But it's important that we pay attention, because we always have the choice to not follow what we have been shown, to not act on it. So we have to make the choice. We have to practice remembrance. So what I would like you to do right now is that if you're comfortable, close your eyes, and otherwise just soften your gaze. And think about something in your life that changed your perspective. And kind of let it come to you. Don't force it. If nothing comes, it's fine. I imagine it will come later. And just feel into that experience. Really sense it. What was it like? What were the colors? What is the sense of the experience you have? If you don't have words for it, it's fine. And take a deep breath. And hold on to that experience right now, for this moment. It's an interesting season we live in, actually, because it's a time where there is a convergence of sacred seasons across traditions. And I want to mention some. But they all have the same invitation to go within, to open the heart, and to live from the inner truth. And those holy days or those seasons that we celebrate and that we take time to go within are important. Because as I just said, we might have a metanoia, but if we don't pay attention, if we don't feed it, then we might make the choice to not step into it. So some of the holy days are last Sunday, it was Nirvana Day, or Parinirvana in Buddhism. It remembers the Buddha's final release into Nirvana, inviting us to let go of clinging by going within and opening to freedom. Just letting go. Can we let go of our idiosyncrasies and not be so attached to them? Mahashivaratri took place, which was Sunday to Monday night, which is a night of spiritual vigilance, fasting, meditation, and self-reflection that helps overcome darkness and ignorance, calling us to be still, listen deeply, and follow the inner prompting. Ramadan started. And it started at sunset of February 17th or 18th, depending on where you are in the world. Ramadan is a month of fasting, prayer, and generosity. That again, it clears the inner noise so that we can go within and open to compassion and clarity. Last Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, the day before Lent. It's inviting humility and honest self-reflection by turning inward to what truly matters. Forgiveness Sunday is today in the Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And it's also a threshold into Great Lent that clears the heart through forgiveness. Again, letting go of the messiness that might be in our fields. Can we just let go? Can we just let go and go in and really rest in that love that is within us? So we are invited in all kinds of ways. It's powerful, right? Because there are all these traditions. It means there are quite a few people who are encouraged right now to go within, to let go of what doesn't serve us and to go within and reconnect with that purity and reconnect with that love that is already ours. So I'm asking you, are you willing to commit to a ritual for yourself or a practice for yourself? So the metanoia you just thought of, that you can revisit it, that you can rekindle that. Because I know that when I think of my experiences, that I'm invigorated, that I'm hopeful, that I remember. So can you set up a ritual for yourself? Maybe it is taking a few days and just letting go of the outside noise and turning inside. Another friend of mine was saying this week, she says, like, yeah, everybody I know in my world right now really feels overwhelmed. And we were talking about that even when good things are happening, that when our schedule is so packed with one thing after another, that it doesn't serve us, that we need time to space to breathe. She called it space to dream. Can we create that for ourselves and go back to our experience? One way to do it, Mary Catherine MacDonald has a book that's called The Joy Reset. And she talks about a practice of recognizing tiny little joys. And the idea of the practice is that we strengthen our nervous system and that we build up our resilience. And it's a very simple practice. It's just noticing what brings you joy during the day and jot it down. And then spending some time just being with that feeling. And it's like when I started doing it, it's very fun, you know. I get up in the morning and I go outside and I hear the birds sing. And I just take a breath and take it in. I love the sound of birds so early in the morning. Or smelling the fresh air. I'm part of a cohort and we started sharing our tiny little joys with each other. And I noticed the tiny little joys of the members of my cohort also brought me joy and brought me to that space. Somebody, sending a picture of beautiful flowers they received and describing how that made them feel in their bodies. And I could feel it. I could be uplifted. So it's a good practice. And what if we turn it to discovering tiny little loves? Where we start to recognize throughout the day how everyone is truly loved equally. How the sun shines equally on everyone. How when the rain falls, it doesn't, keep it dry for some people and not for others. Might depend on which side of the street you walk, but nature provides without any discrimination. We as humans might put rules around it, but nature provides. So can we truly start to recognize how that unconditional love is all around us? Can we start to recognize when we feel that love in our own hearts and take a moment and bathe in it so we can become stable in that love? So that when things happen that normally would throw us off, then now we can stand firm. Like Paul and Thecla stood firm in their belief of love being equal for everyone. When we start practicing, when we start remembering, and when we give it our attention, I think surprises will show up. I've been sharing in previous times that I spoke that I started doing Iyengar yoga about 6 months ago, and it has been really good for my emotional, mental, and physical well-being. And it's like starting Iyengar yoga again and not being where I was like 30 years ago. I really had to let go of my picture of what that was going to look like. And so what I did is I committed to the practice. But I actively worked on letting go of expectations if my postures would look good or not. What was important for me is that I worked it and I gave it my best. And one of the poses they do in Iyengar yoga on a regular basis is headstand. I never had done a headstand in my life. And I actually was quite scared of it. But what they're teaching are preparatory moves you can do to, eventually go up in headstand. So I thought, like, okay, I can do that. But I let go of the idea if I ever would be in headstand or not. I gave myself the permission. I didn't have to end up there. So over the months, I practiced the different yoga poses. I did some prep work for headstand, but I can't say that I did a lot of it. And then one day I went to class and was again, we're going to do headstands. And go like, okay, I'm going to do the prep. So, you interlock your fingers, you put your head down, you walk in your feet. And then one of the practices is that you only kick up one leg and you leave the other foot on the ground. Oh, yeah, that's safe enough, right? So I kick up my right leg, and without me consciously being aware of it, my left leg went up as well, and there I was in headstand. And I was amazed. I was not scared. I actually had quite fun being upside down. But I was amazed that it happened, because I hadn't even, really practiced it. But I had committed to practicing yoga in every other way I could. I had given it my best. And it was like all of a sudden, it's like one of the teachers calls it the miracle of yoga. All of a sudden, this movement happened that I hadn't counted on, but it was so delightful. I think when we put in our efforts to connect with that unconditional love inside of us, when we start recognizing that unconditional love all around us and learn how to bring that in expression, then those miracles will happen as well. Then you will be in the headstand of unconditional love one day and go like, wow, here I am. You know, I had such trouble with this person and now, you know, I feel neutral. I feel fine. Or this issue has been on my mind for so long and I don't feel attached anymore. So make a commitment, you know. Don't settle for the crumbs of well-being. What the world needs right now is your unconditional love expressed. So commit. Commit to remembrance. Commit to recognizing it. And commit to putting it in action. Thank you.